She's nothing but a gold digger who spread her legs for a rich man's wallet. Darius Cole's voice echoed through the ballroom. 200 faces turned toward Elena, frozen in her sapphire dress, champagne trembling in her hand. He wasn't finished. I built her. I made her somebody. And the moment I couldn't give her designer bags anymore, she found a bigger bank account to drain. Elena's vision blurred. 15 years of buried shame crashed over her like a wave. But Darius didn't see the ballroom doors opening behind him. He didn't see who was walking in. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The envelope had been sitting on Elena Mercer's kitchen counter for 11 days. Cream-colored, elegant, a blade wrapped in silk. Westbrook Academy, class of 2009, 15-year reunion. She picked it up for the third time that morning, running her finger along the embossed crest. Her maiden name was printed in gold, Elena Mercer. Not Elena Ashford, not the woman she had become. The woman they remembered was someone else entirely. You're holding that thing like it's a court summons. Julian Ashford's voice came from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, coffee cup in hand, watching her with those warm brown eyes that still made her heart skip after 4 years of marriage. Maybe it is, Elena said. A summons to face every mistake I ever made. Julian crossed the kitchen, his bare feet silent on the marble floor. He was already dressed for the day in a charcoal sweater and slacks understated like everything about him. People who didn't know him might think he was a professor or an architect. They never guessed that the man who preferred old bookstores to black tie galas owned one of the largest tech investment firms in the country. It's been 7 years since the divorce, Elena. 7 years, 2 months, and 16 days. She set the envelope down. Not that I'm counting. Julian didn't laugh. He understood that some wounds didn't heal with time. They just learned to hide better. Darius will be there, she said, the name catching in her throat like a splinter. I assumed. He'll have an audience. All our old friends. The people who believed every lie he told about me. Elena pressed her palms flat against the counter, steadying herself. He'll turn it into a performance. He always does. Julian set down his coffee and moved closer. His hand found the small of her back, warm, steady, an anchor. Then don't go. If I don't go, he wins. He'll tell everyone I was too afraid to show my face. That I'm hiding in my... She stopped, the words bitter on her tongue. In your gilded cage, Julian finished quietly. Elena closed her eyes. It was a phrase from Darius's last email sent the week after their engagement announcement appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Congratulations on finding a richer cage to lock yourself in. Some birds were never meant to fly. She had never shown Julian that email, but somehow he knew. He always knew. His words say more about him than they do about you, Julian said. I know that. Logically, I know that. Elena turned to face him, her eyes searching his. But when I hear his voice in my head, logic doesn't matter. I'm 23 again, standing in our apartment, while he tells me I'm lucky anyone would ever love someone as broken as me. Julian's jaw tightened. It was the only sign of the anger he kept carefully controlled. Anger not at her, but at the man who had spent 8 years dismantling her sense of worth piece by piece. You are not broken, he said, his voice low but fierce. You never were. Then why do I still feel like I am? The night Elena met Julian Ashford, she had been crying in a hospital chapel. It was 3 months after the divorce. 3 months of rebuilding a life from rubble. She had taken a job as an assistant at a small art gallery, a step backward from the curatorial career Darius had convinced her to abandon, but it was something. It was hers. Then her mother had a stroke. Elena had driven 6 hours through the night to reach the hospital in Savannah. She had held her mother's hand while doctors spoke in careful, measured tones about recovery timelines and rehabilitation. She had smiled and nodded and said all the right things. And then she had found a quiet corner and fallen apart. The chapel was empty except for a single figure in the back pew. A tall man with kind eyes and graying temples, sitting with his hands folded, staring at nothing. "I'm sorry," Elena had said, wiping her face. "I didn't realize anyone was here." "Don't apologize." His voice was gentle. "Hospitals have a way of stripping us down to who we really are. There's no shame in that." She had sat down without meaning to, drawn by something she couldn't name. They talked for an hour. He told her his business partner was in the ICU after a car accident. She told him about her mother, about the divorce, about the art history degree she had abandoned to support her husband's career. "What stopped you from going back?" he asked. "My husband said I wasn't talented enough, that I was being foolish, even trying." The man studied her for a long moment. "And you believed him?" He said it enough times that it started to feel true. "That's not truth," he said quietly. "That's erosion. There's a difference." She learned his name when he handed her a business card before leaving Julian Ashford Capital. She had nearly dropped it when she looked him up later and realized she had been crying in front of one of the wealthiest men in Georgia. But when he called her the next week to check on her mother, he didn't mention money. He asked about the art history degree. He asked what she would study if she could go back. He asked questions no one had asked her in years, questions about her dreams, her passions. The person she had been before Darius Cole convinced her that person wasn't worth being. Julian didn't rescue her. That would come to matter later when Darius accused her of trading one cage for another. Julian simply stood beside her while she rescued herself. He was there when she enrolled in night classes to finish her degree. He was there when she got her first job offer from a real gallery. He was there when she told her therapist for the first time about the night Darius had thrown a plate at the wall beside her head and called it expressing frustration. "You could have anyone," she had said once early in their relationship. "Why me?" "Because you're not looking for someone to complete you," Julian answered. "You're looking for someone to witness who you're becoming." That's rare, Elena. That's extraordinary. They were married 2 years later in a small ceremony at his family's estate outside Atlanta. 30 guests, no press. Her mother walked her down the aisle. Darius sent a gift, a crystal vase with a card that read, "Hope, this one doesn't break as easily as the last." Julian had wanted to respond. Elena stopped him. "Don't give him the satisfaction," she said. "He wants a reaction, any reaction. He wants to remind you that he still has power over you." "Then I'll prove he doesn't." She had believed it then. She wasn't sure she believed it now. The reunion was 2 weeks away. Elena tried to focus on work. Her art authentication consultancy had grown beyond anything she had imagined. She had just returned from Florence, where she had helped a collector verify a possible Caravaggio. Her client list included museums, private collectors, and auction houses across 3 continents. But every night, she dreamed about Darius. Not the divorce, not the screaming fights, or the cold silences, or the final devastating moment when he told her he was leaving, because she had become boring. She dreamed about the good years, the early years, when his ambition had seemed romantic, and his intensity had felt like passion. She dreamed about the girl who had believed him when he said she was special. The girl who had handed over her grandmother's inheritance to pay for his law school because he promised they would build a future together. The girl who had turned down a dream job at the High Museum because he needed her home to host dinners for his partners. That girl was still inside her somewhere, waiting to believe the lies again. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," Julian said the night before the reunion. They were in their bedroom, Elena staring at the sapphire dress she had chosen, a color that made her feel powerful, that matched the ring Julian had given her when he proposed. "I'm not trying to prove anything." "Then what is this about?" Elena sat on the edge of the bed. "It's about finishing something, closing a door I left open when I walked away." "You didn't walk away. You escaped." "Did I?" She looked up at him. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still running. Like he's still right behind me, whispering all the things he used to say." Julian knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "What did he used to say?" She had never told him the worst of it, the things that lived in the darkest corners of her memory. He said I was lucky he put up with me, that no one else would ever want me, that I was a burden he carried because he felt sorry for me. The words came out flat, recited like a grocery list. He said I wasn't smart enough to finish my degree, that my art was embarrassing, that I should be grateful he let me stay home instead of humiliating myself trying to have a career. Julian's grip on her hands tightened. Elena. He said those things so many times that I memorized them. They became the voice in my head. Sometimes they're still louder than my own voice. And you think facing him will make them stop? I think avoiding him proves they're right. She pulled one hand free and touched his face. I have to do this, Julian. I have to stand in front of him and not fall apart. I have to prove to myself that I'm not the woman he convinced me I was. Julian was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. I have the foundation gala tomorrow night. I'll try to get away early, but I might not make it until 9 or 10. I know. You'll be on your own for a few hours. I know that too. He searched her face. Are you ready? Elena looked at the sapphire dress, then back at her husband. This man who had never once made her feel small, who had spent 4 years showing her what real love looked like. Ask me again tomorrow. The morning of the reunion, Elena woke before dawn. She stood at the window of their penthouse watching the Atlanta skyline emerge from darkness. Somewhere out there, Darius was probably rehearsing his lines, planning his performance, sharpening his knives. She knew how he would play it. The concerned ex-husband, the magnanimous former partner who still worried about her. He would paint himself as the hero of their story, the hard-working man who built his success from nothing, betrayed by a wife who couldn't handle the struggle. He would never mention the inheritance, the sacrificed career, the years of psychological warfare disguised as love. He would stand in front of everyone they had ever known and rewrite history. And she would have to watch. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend Tamara. I'll be there at 6 sharp. We're walking in together. He's not getting you alone. Elena smiled despite herself. Tamara had been there through everything. The marriage, the divorce, the slow and painful reconstruction of Elena's identity. She was the one who had first suggested therapy, the one who had held Elena while she sobbed and asked, why wasn't I enough? Thank you, Elena typed back. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd be fine, Tamara replied. But this way is more fun. I've been waiting 15 years to watch that man get what he deserves. Elena wasn't sure Darius would get what he deserved. Men like him rarely did. They were too charming, too careful, too skilled at hiding their cruelty behind a perfect smile. But maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Maybe tonight she would finally find her voice. So, the Piedmont Country Club looked exactly as Elena remembered a monument to old Atlanta, money all white columns and manicured lawns. The parking lot was already filling with luxury cars, their occupants emerging in cocktail dresses and tailored suits. Elena sat in the back of the town car Julian had insisted she take, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ma'am. The driver's voice was gentle. We're here. I know. She didn't move. Just give me a minute. Through the tinted window, she watched her former classmates streaming toward the entrance. Faces she hadn't seen in 15 years. People who had witnessed her marriage to Darius, who had attended their wedding, who had probably gossiped when the divorce announcement appeared. What did they remember? The bright-eyed girl who had married her high school sweetheart? Or the hollow woman who had emerged from 8 years of marriage looking like a shadow of herself? Her phone buzzed. Julian. I'm thinking about you. You are stronger than you know. Elena took a deep breath, then another. She opened the door and stepped out. The Georgia evening was warm and humid, the air thick with the scent of magnolias. Elena smoothed her dress sapphire blue, elegant, understated, and began walking toward the entrance. She was halfway there when she heard his voice. Well, well, look who finally showed up. Darius Cole stood at the top of the steps, a glass of bourbon in one hand, his smile wide and predatory. He looked almost the same as she remembered, tall, athletic, his dark skin glowing under the country club lights. Handsome in the way a beautiful snake is handsome. Dangerous if you knew where to look. Hello, Darius. It's been a long time, Elena. He descended the steps, slowly, deliberately, a king surveying his domain. Or should I say, Mrs. Ashford, I hear congratulations are in order. You certainly landed on your feet. I did. She kept her voice steady. How are you? Can't complain. The firm is thriving. Just made partner last year. He stopped in front of her close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same aggressive, expensive scent he had always worn. But you already knew that, didn't you? I'm sure you've been keeping tabs. I haven't, actually. Something flickered in his eyes, annoyance maybe. Darius had always needed to be the center of attention, especially hers. That's a shame. I've certainly been keeping tabs on you. His gaze traveled down her body, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. You look good, Elena. Money agrees with you. I should go inside. What's the rush? He stepped closer, blocking her path. We were married for 8 years. Surely you can spare 5 minutes for old time's sake. Elena's heart was pounding. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, to get as far from this man as possible. But she had promised herself she wouldn't run. Not tonight. 5 minutes, she said. Then I'm going in. Darius smiled. It was the same smile he used in the courtroom, charming, confident, utterly false. I've got to say, I was surprised when I saw your name on the guest list. I figured you'd be too busy with your new life to bother with us regular folks. These are my classmates too, Darius. Are they? He tilted his head. Because the Elena I knew wasn't exactly a joiner. She preferred to hide in the background while I did all the heavy lifting. There it was. The first jab. Casual, almost friendly, but designed to wound. The Elena you knew doesn't exist anymore. Clearly. His smile sharpened. The Elena I knew couldn't afford a dress like that. The Elena I knew didn't have a billionaire husband to buy her nice things. Julian doesn't buy me things. I have my own career. Oh, right. The art thing. Darius waved a dismissive hand. What is it you do again? Look at old paintings and tell rich people what they want to hear. Elena felt the old familiar burn of shame spreading through her chest. Darius had always known exactly where to strike. I authenticate artwork for museums and collectors. I've consulted for the Getty, the Metropolitan, and several major auction houses. How nice for you. His tone said it was anything but. Must be fulfilling riding your husband's connections to a pretend career. Julian has nothing to do with my work. Sure he doesn't. Darius drained the rest of his bourbon. Look, Elena, I'm not trying to start anything. I just think it's funny, that's all. You spent 8 years telling me you wanted to be independent, that you didn't want to rely on anyone, and then the second we split up, you found the richest man in Georgia and latched on. That's not what happened. Isn't it? He leaned in, his voice dropping. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you traded one meal ticket for a bigger one. At least when you were with me, you had to work for it. Elena's hands were trembling. She hid them behind her back, unwilling to give him the satisfaction. I'm going inside now. Of course you are. Darius stepped aside with an exaggerated bow. Go find your little friends. Tell them how happy you are. I'm sure they'll believe every word. She walked past him without responding, her heels clicking against the stone steps. She could feel his eyes on her back, could practically hear the smug satisfaction radiating off him. This was just the beginning. She knew that. The real assault would come later when he had an audience. She just had to survive long enough for Julian to arrive. The ballroom was exactly as she remembered it. Gilded chandeliers, white tablecloths, a string quartet playing something forgettable in the corner. Faces turned as she entered, some familiar, some unrecognizable after 15 years. Elena. Tamara pushed through the crowd, resplendent in a red dress that matched her personality, Bold, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. "You made it!" Tamara pulled her into a fierce hug. "I saw you talking to the devil outside. You okay?" "I will be." "That bad?" "He called my career a pretend job and implied I married Julian for his money, so the usual." Tamara's eyes narrowed. "I'm going to kill him." "Get in line." Elena managed a weak smile. "Let's just get through tonight. Julian should be here by 9. "Good, because I have a feeling things are about to get ugly." They moved through the room together, stopping to greet old classmates with careful, measured pleasantries. Elena noticed the way people looked at her, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed envy, a few with something that looked unsettlingly like pity. They had heard Darius's version of the story, the version where he was the hard-working hero and she was the ungrateful wife who abandoned him for greener pastures. She could see it in their eyes, the judgment, the assumptions. But she kept her smile fixed in place, her voice steady, her answers gracious. She was not going to give them ammunition, not yet. An hour passed. Then, too, Elena began to relax. Maybe Darius would leave her alone. Maybe he had said everything he needed to say on the steps outside. Maybe she had been worried about nothing. And then the feedback squeal of a microphone cut through the chatter. Darius stood on the small stage at the front of the ballroom, a fresh drink in his hand, his smile radiating false warmth. "Everyone, can I have your attention?" The room quieted. Heads turned. Elena's stomach dropped. "I just wanted to take a moment to welcome everyone to our 15-year reunion." Darius spread his arms wide, soaking in the applause. "Look at us. We survived high school. We survived our 20s, and somehow we're all still standing." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "I'm looking around this room and I'm seeing a lot of success stories. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, parents. People who worked their tails off to build something real." His eyes found Elena across the room. "And I'm also seeing some people who took, let's call it a different path." The air in the room shifted. Elena felt the attention swing toward her, 100 curious gazes suddenly focused on her face. "Some of you might remember my ex-wife, Elena Mercer." Darius gestured toward her with his glass. "Stand up, Elena. Let everyone see how well you're doing." Elena didn't move. "No, that's okay." She was always a little shy. Darius's smile sharpened. "Elena and I were high school sweethearts for those who don't remember. We built a life together from nothing. I was in law school working 3 jobs, and she was right there beside me. For a while." The pause was deliberate, calculated. "But you know how it goes. Some people have the stomach for the struggle, and some people don't." Elena's face burned. She could feel Tamara's hand gripping her arm, a silent warning. "Don't react. Don't give him what he wants. I'm not going to stand up here and badmouth my ex-wife." Darius continued, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "That's not what tonight is about. But I will say this. I worry about her sometimes." He locked eyes with Elena, and for a moment, all pretense fell away. She saw the real Darius beneath the charming mask, the cold, calculating predator who had spent 8 years making her feel worthless. When you get handed everything on a silver platter, you can lose touch with reality. You can forget who you are, where you came from. You can forget the people who were there for you when you had nothing. He paused, letting the words sink in. "And I think that's a tragedy. I really do." Silence, and then softly murmurs of agreement from around the room. Elena watched as her former classmates nodded along, their faces sympathetic not for her, but for him. Darius had done it. He had poisoned the well-painted himself as the noble victim, and cast her as the shallow opportunist who had abandoned him for a richer life. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred. She was 23 again, standing in their apartment while he told her she was worthless. She was invisible. She was nothing. And then, the ballroom doors opened. A man walked in. He wasn't tall or imposing. He didn't demand attention. But somehow, inexplicably, every head in the room turned to look at him. Elena knew that silhouette, that walk, that quiet, unshakable presence. Julian. He was 2 hours early, and from the look on his face, he had heard every word. Julian didn't pause at the threshold. He didn't scan the room for familiar faces or wait for someone to greet him. His eyes found Elena immediately, as if she were the only person in a room of 200, and he began walking toward her. The whispers started before he had taken 3 steps. "Is that... Oh my God, that's Julian Ashford." The Julian Ashford. From Ashford Capital. I read he's worth 3 billion. 3 billion. Elena watched her husband move through the crowd with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything. He wasn't performing. He never performed. He simply existed in a way that made other people rearrange themselves around him. Darius was still on stage, the microphone dangling from his hand, his carefully constructed moment of triumph crumbling in real time. His face had gone rigid, the charming smile frozen into something that looked almost like fear. Julian reached Elena and took her hand. He didn't kiss her. He didn't make a show of their reunion. He simply intertwined his fingers with hers and squeezed once, a private language they had developed over 4 years. "I'm here. You're safe." "You're early," Elena whispered. "I left the gala during the keynote speech. Told them I had a family emergency." "Julian, that was Senator Morrison's speech. You were supposed to present the foundation award." "I know." His thumb traced a small circle on her palm. "My wife needed me. Senator Morrison will understand." Tamara appeared at Elena's other side, her eyes wide. "Julian, your timing is absolutely cinematic. I could kiss you." "Please don't," he said, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Elena would never let me hear the end of it." But the lightness faded quickly. Julian's gaze shifted past Elena, past Tamara, and landed on the stage where Darius still stood frozen. "He's been talking about you," Tamara said quietly. "Making his little speech. You probably heard the tail end." "I heard enough." The 3 words were spoken without inflection, but Elena felt Julian's hand tighten around hers. She had seen her husband angry exactly twice in 4 years, once when a business partner attempted to defraud the foundation, and once when he discovered that Darius had been sending her threatening emails. Both times the anger had been controlled, channeled, surgical. This was different. This was personal. "Julian," Elena said softly. "Don't. He wants a reaction. That's what he does. He provokes and then plays the victim when someone pushes back." "I'm not going to react." Julian's voice was calm. "I'm going to observe. There's a difference." On stage, Darius had recovered enough to attempt a recovery. He cleared his throat and raised his glass again. "Well, looks like we have a special guest tonight, Julian Ashford, everyone. Elena's new husband." He stretched the word "new" into something that sounded almost obscene. "Come on up here, Julian. We'd love to hear from you." It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown. Darius was trying to regain control by pulling Julian into his arena, onto his stage, playing by his rules. Julian didn't move. "I appreciate the invitation." He called out, his voice carrying clearly without a microphone. "But I'm exactly where I need to be." The message was unmistakable. He wasn't going to dance to Darius's tune. Darius's jaw tightened. He covered it with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Fair enough, fair enough. Can't blame a man for wanting to stay close to his wife." He turned to address the room again. "Anyway, like I was saying before, our honored guest arrived tonight is about celebrating how far we've all come. The struggles we've overcome. The success we've earned." He put particular emphasis on that last word. Earned. As if to remind everyone that Julian's wealth was inherited, that Elena's life was borrowed, that neither of them had truly worked for anything. Elena felt the familiar burn of shame spreading through her chest. Even with Julian beside her, Darius's words found their target. "Don't listen to him," Julian murmured. "He's performing for an audience. Everything he says is calculated." "I know, but knowing doesn't make it stop hurting." Julian's grip on her hand tightened. "Then we'll make him stop." Before Elena could ask what he meant, a woman approached them. Bethany Morrison, queen bee of their graduating class, now a real estate agent with too much Botox and an Instagram feed full of humble brags. Elena, oh my goodness, it's been forever. Bethany's voice was syrupy sweet, her eyes calculating. And this must be the famous Julian Ashford. We've heard so much about you. Have you? Julian's tone was pleasant but distant. Only good things, of course. Well, mostly good things. Bethany laughed a high, brittle sound. Darius has been telling us all about how you two met. So romantic the way Elena found you right after the divorce. The implication was clear. Elena had been shopping for a replacement before the ink was dry. Actually, Julian said, we met 3 months after the divorce was finalized. Elena was at the hospital where my business partner was recovering from an accident. She was there for her mother who had suffered a stroke. Bethany's smile faltered. Oh, I didn't? She spent 6 weeks sleeping in a hospital chair. When I first saw her, she was crying in the chapel because the doctors had told her the recovery would be longer than expected, and she wasn't sure how she would pay for the extended care. Elena's throat tightened. She had never heard Julian describe that night to anyone. Your husband's version of events seems to have some significant gaps. Julian continued. Perhaps you should ask Elena directly if you want the full story. Bethany's face had gone red. I wasn't trying to, Darius just said, I'm sure he did. Julian's voice remained perfectly cordial. Enjoy your evening, Bethany. He guided Elena away, leaving Bethany standing with her mouth half open. You didn't have to do that, Elena said when they were out of earshot. Yes, I did. Julian. She was repeating lies she heard from a man who spent 8 years destroying your self-worth. Someone needed to correct the record. They found a quiet corner near the bar, Tamara trailing behind them like a protective shadow. The string quartet was playing something classical, the chatter of the crowd, a constant murmur around them. He's not done, Tamara said, nodding toward the stage where Darius was finally stepping down from the microphone. That whole speech was just the opening act. He's going to spend the rest of the night working the room, telling everyone his version of history. Let him, Elena said, though her voice wavered slightly. We knew this would happen. Did you know he would have an audience this receptive? Tamara shook her head. I've been listening to the gossip all night. He's been planting seeds for weeks apparently, calling old classmates, reconnecting on social media, making sure everyone heard his side of the story before you even walked through the door. Elena closed her eyes. Of course he had. Darius never left anything to chance. Every case he tried was meticulously prepared, every argument anticipated, every weakness exploited. Their marriage had been the same way. He's coming over here, Julian said quietly. Elena opened her eyes. Darius was indeed making his way through the crowd toward them, stopping every few feet to shake hands. Accept congratulations. Play the role of the gracious host. The golden boy of Westbrook Academy still basking in his kingdom. He reached them with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Julian Ashford, in the flesh. He extended his hand. Darius Cole, I don't think we've been formally introduced. Julian looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he looked back up at Darius's face. An introduction isn't necessary, he said. I know who you are. The words hung in the air between them. Darius's hand remained extended, frozen, until the awkwardness became unbearable, and he lowered it with a forced laugh. Fair enough. I guess Elena's told you all about me. She has. All bad, I'm sure. Darius took a sip of his drink, his eyes fixed on Julian. But you know how it is. There are 2 sides to every story. I'm sure the version you heard was colored by emotion. The version I heard was supported by documentation, Julian replied calmly. Bank records, email transcripts, text messages. I'm a thorough man, Mr. Cole. When I make a decision, I make sure I have all the facts. Something flickered in Darius's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or fear? Documentation, he repeated. That's a very clinical way to approach a marriage. I wasn't approaching a marriage. I was understanding what my wife survived. There's a difference. Elena watched the exchange with her heart pounding. She had never seen anyone speak to Darius like this, meeting his aggression with calm, his bluster with precision. Julian wasn't fighting him. He was simply refusing to play the game at all. Darius shifted his attention to Elena, perhaps hoping for easier prey. "You're being awfully quiet, Elena. Cat got your tongue? Or are you just letting your husband do all the talking these days?" "I have nothing to say to you, Darius. Nothing at all. After 8 years of marriage, after everything we built together." He put his hand over his heart in mock pain. "That hurts, Elena. It really does. What we built together," Elena said, her voice tight, "was paid for with my grandmother's inheritance. Every brick of it." The words were out before she could stop them. She felt Julian's hand on her back, steady and warm. Darius's smile flickered. "That's not how I remember it. Your memory seems to have a lot of convenient gaps." "Careful, Elena." His voice dropped, the charming facade slipping just enough to reveal the cold underneath. "You don't want to make a scene in front of all our friends." "They're your friends," she replied. "They were always your friends. You made sure of that." "Did I?" He tilted his head, studying her like a specimen. "Or did you just never bother to make any of your own? You were always so busy hiding in my shadow, playing the supportive wife. Never had much of a personality outside of that role, did you?" Elena felt the words land like physical blows. This was what he did. This was what he had always done. He found the cracks in her armor and drove his blade straight into them. "That's enough," Julian said quietly. "I'm sorry, was I talking to you?" Darius didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on Elena, watching her reaction with the satisfaction of a predator toying with wounded prey. "This is between me and my ex-wife. When you insult my wife, you involve me." "Your wife?" Darius laughed. "Let me tell you something about your wife, Ashford. She's not what she seems. That shy, delicate act she puts on, it's manipulation. She spent 8 years making me feel guilty for working hard, for being successful, for wanting more than the mediocre life she was willing to settle for." "That's not true," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Isn't it? Remember how you used to cry every time I worked late? How you'd guilt me into staying home when I had cases to prepare? Remember how you gave up on your art the second it got hard, and then blamed me for not encouraging you enough?" Each accusation was delivered with surgical precision, targeting the doubts. Elena still carried the insecurities that had never fully healed. "I gave up my art because you told me I wasn't good enough," she said, her voice shaking. "You told me it was embarrassing. You told me I should focus on supporting your career instead. I told you the truth. That's what husbands do. I wasn't going to lie to you just to protect your feelings." "You didn't tell me the truth. You told me what you needed me to believe." Darius's expression hardened. "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're already rewriting history, making yourself the victim. That's what you've always done, Elena. Nothing is ever your fault. Nothing is ever your responsibility." "That's enough." Julian's voice hadn't risen, but something in his tone made Darius finally turn to look at him. "Excuse me. I said that's enough. You've made your point. You've put on your show. You can stop now." Darius's eyes narrowed. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with, Ashford. I'm a trial lawyer. I do this for a living." "I'm aware of what you do for a living. I'm also aware that you lost 3 major cases last year, that your firm's revenue has declined by 22% since you made partner, and that you've been passed over twice for the equity position you were promised." The color drained from Darius's face. "I don't know what you think, I also know that you've been telling people your ex-wife left you because she wanted a richer husband, when the divorce papers clearly show that you initiated the separation after beginning an affair with a paralegal from your office. Sarah Mitchell, I believe. She's since moved to another firm." Elena stared at her husband. She had known about the affair. It had been the final straw that pushed her out the door, but she had never told Julian the details. "How do you—" Darius's composure was cracking, the smooth facade splintering to reveal the panic underneath. "When I commit to something, I commit completely," Julian said. "When I fell in love with Elena, I made it my business to understand what she had been through, every detail, every document, every lie you told her and told about her." Darius's mouth opened, but no words came out. "You've spent the last several hours constructing a narrative in which you're the hard-working hero, and my wife is the ungrateful villain. You've poisoned this room against her before she even walked through the door." Julian's voice remained perfectly calm. "I'm not going to allow that narrative to stand unchallenged." "This is none of your business," Darius hissed. "This is between me and Elena. You made it my business when you decided to publicly humiliate the woman I love." Tamara let out a low whistle. "Damn," she muttered under her breath. "I really should have brought popcorn." Darius straightened, attempting to regain his footing. "You know what, fine. You want to play the white knight, go ahead. But don't pretend you know what our marriage was like. You weren't there." "No, I wasn't. But I've seen the aftermath. I've held Elena while she woke up from nightmares about the things you said to her. I've watched her flinch every time someone raises their voice, because you spent 8 years teaching her that anger was always followed by pain." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized Julian knew about the nightmares. She had always tried to hide them to pretend she was fully healed. That's ridiculous," Darius sputtered. "I never touched her." "There are different kinds of violence, Mr. Cole. The kind that leaves bruises is only the most obvious." The two men stared at each other across an impossible divide. Darius was trembling slightly, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Julian stood perfectly still, his presence somehow larger than his physical frame. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "Is everything okay over there?" It was Scott Peterson, one of Darius's old football buddies, pushing his way through the growing cluster of curious onlookers. The confrontation had drawn attention exactly as Darius had planned, but not in the way he had anticipated. "Everything's fine," Darius said, forcing his smile back into place. "Just catching up with old friends." "Didn't look like catching up," Scott said, glancing between the three of them. "Looked like an argument." "Just a misunderstanding." Darius clapped Scott on the shoulder. "You know how it is. Old relationships, old baggage." But Scott's eyes lingered on Julian, and Elena could see the calculation happening behind them. Scott wasn't a deep thinker, but even he could sense the shift in power dynamics. "Mr. Ashford," he said, extending his hand. "I don't think we've met. I'm Scott Peterson. I went to school with Elena and Darius." Julian shook his hand briefly. "Julian, I read about you in Forbes last month. That piece about the Sustainable Energy Fund. Pretty impressive stuff. Thank you." "Must be nice," Scott continued, "having that kind of money. I mean, some of us are still grinding it out the old-fashioned way, you know, working for every dollar." There it was. The same narrative Darius had been pushing all night. The implication that wealth was earned through struggle, that Elena's new life was somehow stolen rather than deserved. "I appreciate hard work," Julian replied evenly. "I also appreciate intelligence, resilience, and the courage to rebuild your life after someone systematically tried to destroy it. My wife has all of those qualities in abundance." Scott's eyebrows rose. "Sure, yeah, of course. I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." Julian's gaze swept across the small crowd that had gathered, his voice carrying clearly. "Let me be direct, since subtlety doesn't seem to be working. My wife has accomplished more in the last 4 years than most people accomplish in a lifetime. She finished a degree she was told she wasn't smart enough to complete. She built a career she was told she wasn't talented enough to pursue. She recovered from a marriage that most people wouldn't have survived." He turned back to Darius. "And she did all of that, despite 8 years of being told she was worthless, stupid, and lucky that anyone would ever love her. That's not weakness. That's strength beyond anything I've ever witnessed." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the string quartet seemed to have gone quiet. Elena felt tears pricking at her eyes. She had spent so many years believing Darius's version of her story, the version where she was the failure, the burden, the lucky girl, who should have been grateful for whatever scraps he threw her way. Hearing Julian speak the truth out loud in front of all these people was like watching someone tear down a prison she had lived in for so long she had forgotten it was a cage. "I think," Tamara said into the silence, "we could all use another drink." The spell broke. People began to disperse, some heading for the bar, others resuming their conversations with forced casualness. But Elena could feel the shift in the room. The whispers were different now, less certain, less condemning. Darius stood alone, abandoned by his allies, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low enough that only Elena and Julian could hear. "You think you can come in here with your money and your speeches and rewrite history? You don't know anything about what we had." "I know everything I need to know," Julian replied. "You know what Elena told you, and Elena has always been a liar." "Careful, Mr. Cole." "Or what?" Darius's eyes were wild now, the charming facade completely gone. "What are you going to do? You can't buy your way out of the truth. You can't buy her a personality or talent or any of the things she spent our entire marriage pretending she had." "Darius," Elena said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Stop." "Why?" "Because your rich husband might get upset." He laughed bitterly. "That's what you do, isn't it? Find a man to hide behind. You never could stand on your own 2 feet. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" "Tell me, Elena." "Tell me one thing you've accomplished without a man's help." "One thing." "Your degree, Julian paid for it. Your career, Julian made calls. Your entire life is built on the foundation of someone else's success." The words hit her like a physical blow. Because some part of her, the part that still heard Darius's voice in her head every time she doubted herself, believed he might be right. Julian moved to respond, but Elena held up her hand. "No," she said. "Let me." She stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the man who had spent 8 years making her feel small. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "I did hide behind you. For 8 years, I let you be the face of our marriage, while I shrank into the background. I told myself it was because I was supporting your dreams, but the truth is, I was afraid." Darius's expression flickered. He hadn't expected agreement. "I was afraid that everything you said about me was true, that I wasn't smart enough or talented enough or interesting enough to have a life of my own. Every time I tried to do something for myself, every time I dreamed about going back to school or pursuing my art, you found a way to make me feel stupid for even wanting it." "Elena, I'm not finished." Her voice was steady now, fueled by years of suppressed anger. "You didn't support me, Darius. You controlled me. You told me what to wear, what to say, who to be friends with. You decided what was realistic for me and what was foolish. And every time I pushed back, you made me feel guilty. You made me feel like I was the problem. That's not how it was. That's exactly how it was. And the worst part is, I let you do it. I let you convince me that your version of reality was the only one that mattered. I gave you my grandmother's money. I gave up my career. I gave up 8 years of my life trying to be the wife you wanted me to be, and no matter what I did, it was never enough." Darius's face had gone pale. Around them, people were listening, not even pretending to have other conversations anymore. "But here's the thing, Darius." Elena's voice rose slightly. "I'm not that woman anymore. I haven't been that woman for years. And you don't get to stand in front of all these people and pretend that you were the victim of our marriage. You don't get to rewrite our history just because you can't stand the fact that I'm happy without you." "You're not happy," Darius spat. "You're deluded. You think this man loves you? He bought you, that's all. You're a trophy, Elena. A pretty thing he shows off at parties. The second you stop being useful, he'll throw you away just like I did." The cruelty of it, the casual, deliberate cruelty, took Elena's breath away. And then Julian spoke. "I've heard enough." He stepped forward, placing himself between Elena and Darius. Not protectively, Elena didn't need protection anymore, but as a statement. a line drawn in the sand. "You can insult my wife's character," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You can question her accomplishments. You can even question my motives. But what you cannot do is stand here and pretend that your abuse was love. I never abused her. You spent 8 years convincing her that she was worthless. You isolated her from her friends. You sabotaged her education. You took her money and her time and her youth and gave her nothing in return except the constant message that she wasn't good enough." Julian's eyes were cold. "That's abuse, Mr. Cole. The fact that you never raised your hand doesn't make it any less real." Darius opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The crowd around them had grown. 50 people, maybe more, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and fascination. "Here's what's going to happen," Julian continued. "You're going to leave this event. You're going to stop contacting my wife, and you're going to stop telling lies about her to anyone who will listen. And if I don't, then I will make sure that every client, every partner, and every judge in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are. I have the documentation, Mr. Cole. Bank records, emails, text messages, everything Elena was too afraid to use during the divorce because she just wanted to escape." Darius's face had gone gray. "You're bluffing." "I never bluff." Julian's voice was flat, final. "Ask anyone who's ever negotiated with me." The silence stretched between them. Darius looked around at the faces of his former classmates, people he had spent all evening charming, persuading, winning to his side. Now they were watching him with something that looked disturbingly like contempt. His kingdom was crumbling. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat had no weight behind it. He turned and pushed through the crowd, heading for the exit. Elena watched him go, feeling something she hadn't expected. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Julian's hand found hers. "Are you okay?" "I don't know." She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "I think so. I think I might be okay for the first time in a very long time." Tamara appeared at her side, her eyes wide. "That was absolutely incredible, both of you. I'm going to be talking about this for the next 10 years. The crowd was dispersing slowly, people returning to their conversations, but casting frequent glances back toward Elena and Julian. The whispers had changed again, less gossip, now more amazement. "We should go," Elena said. "I don't think I can handle any more attention tonight." "We can leave whenever you want," Julian replied, "but there's something you should do first." "What?" He nodded toward a cluster of people near the bar. Bethany Morrison, Scott Peterson, and a few others who had been most vocal in supporting Darius's narrative. "Tell them your version, not for their sake, for yours. You've spent too many years being silent. It's time people heard the truth from you, not from me." Elena looked at the group, her stomach clenching with anxiety. These were the people who had judged her, who had believed every lie Darius told. But Julian was right. She had been silent for too long. "Okay," she said. "But come with me. Always." They walked toward the bar together, and for the first time all evening, Elena didn't feel like she was walking toward a firing squad. She felt like she was walking toward freedom. The group at the bar fell silent as Elena approached. Bethany Morrison's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Scott Peterson suddenly found something fascinating about his shoes. Two other women, Jennifer Hayes and Courtney Williams, both former cheerleaders who had worshipped Darius in high school, exchanged nervous glances. They had all been laughing just moments ago. Now they looked like children caught passing notes in class. "Elena," Bethany said, her voice artificially bright. "I know what you were doing." Elena stopped in front of them, Julian, a steady presence at her side. "You were talking about me, about what just happened, about whether any of it was true." Bethany's smile flickered. "That's not—" "It's okay. I would be talking about it too." Elena took a breath, steadying herself. "But before you decide what to believe, I think you should hear my side of the story. The real story. Not the version Darius has been telling everyone. Scott shifted uncomfortably. Look, Elena, this is between you and Darius. We don't want to get in the middle of... You're already in the middle of it. He put you there. He's been calling you for weeks, hasn't he? Reconnecting on social media, reminding you of the good old days. The guilty silence that followed was confirmation enough. He's been planning this for a long time, Elena continued. That's what Darius does. He prepares. He strategizes. He makes sure the jury is on his side before the trial even begins. We're not a jury, Jennifer said weakly. Aren't you? He stood up there and told everyone I was a gold digger who abandoned him for a richer husband. He painted himself as the hard-working hero and me as the ungrateful villain. And you all believed him because that's the story he wanted you to believe. Courtney cleared her throat. Elena, he seemed really hurt. When he talked about your divorce, he seemed like a man performing grief for an audience. Elena's voice was steady now, stronger than she had expected. That's his specialty. He's a trial lawyer. He convinces people for a living. He convinced me for 8 years that I was worthless, and he almost convinced all of you tonight. The group exchanged uncertain glances. What do you mean he convinced you that you were worthless? Bethany asked, her voice smaller now. Elena had never spoken about this publicly. She had kept the details of her marriage locked away, partly out of shame, partly out of fear that no one would believe her. But standing here with Julian's hand warm against her back, she realized that silence had only given Darius more power. Did any of you ever wonder why I stopped painting? She asked. Courtney nodded slowly. I remember you were really good. You won that art competition senior year. Everyone thought you'd go to SCAD. I did go to SCAD. For 1 semester. Elena's throat tightened at the memory. Then Darius got into law school and told me we couldn't afford for both of us to be in school at the same time. He needed me to work to support us. He said my art could wait. That seems reasonable, Scott said. Lots of couples make sacrifices. It does seem reasonable, doesn't it? That's what I thought too. Elena met his eyes. But then I got a scholarship, a full scholarship to finish my degree. And Darius told me I shouldn't take it. The confusion on their faces was almost painful. Why would he tell you not to take a scholarship? Jennifer asked. Because if I took it, I would be spending time away from home. I would be meeting new people, developing new interests, building a life that didn't revolve entirely around him. He said I was being selfish. He said real artists don't need formal education. He said the scholarship was probably a mistake and I would just embarrass myself if I accepted it. Elena's voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. So I turned it down. I stayed home and typed his briefs and hosted his dinner parties and smiled at his colleagues while he told them what a supportive wife I was. And every time I tried to paint, he found a way to make me feel stupid for even trying. He'd look at my work and say things like, "That's interesting, honey, but maybe you should stick to what you're good at." Or he'd schedule something on the nights I had set aside for my art, and when I complained, he'd say I was being selfish again. Bethany had gone pale. Elena, I had no idea. How would you? Darius was always charming in public. Everyone loved him. He saved the real cruelty for when we were alone. Cruelty? Scott's voice was skeptical. That seems like a strong word for what? Elena interrupted. For systematically destroying someone's confidence, for spending 8 years telling me I was lucky anyone would love me, for convincing me that every dream I had was unrealistic and every talent I possessed was mediocre. She felt the old anger rising, the anger she had suppressed for so long. He didn't hit me, Scott. But there are other ways to hurt someone. There are other ways to trap someone in a marriage they're too broken to leave. Julian spoke for the first time. Elena, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I've been quiet for too long. I let him control the narrative because I was too ashamed to fight back. But I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm angry. She turned back to the group who were watching her with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Do you want to know why I married Julian? It wasn't for his money. When we met, I didn't even know who he was. I was crying in a hospital chapel because my mother had just had a stroke, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to pay for her care and keep my apartment and survive on the salary from my gallery job. I didn't know about your mother, Courtney said softly. No one did. Darius and I weren't speaking by then, and I didn't have anyone else to tell. I had pushed away all my friends during the marriage because Darius always found something wrong with them. Too loud, too opinionated, bad influences. By the time I left him, I had no one. Elena's voice broke slightly, but she forced herself to continue. Julian talked to me that night. He didn't owe me anything, but he sat with me in that chapel and listened while I fell apart. And when I was done, he didn't tell me I was being dramatic or that I should be grateful for what I had. He just asked what I needed. She looked at her husband, seeing him through the lens of that desperate night. No one had asked me what I needed in 8 years. I had forgotten that anyone could. The silence around them was heavy-charged. Jennifer wiped at her eyes. Elena, I'm so sorry. You didn't know. Darius made sure of that. Elena turned back to the group. He's very good at making sure people only see what he wants them to see. That's why I'm telling you this now. Not because I need your sympathy, but because I need you to understand that the story he's been telling is a lie. What about the money? Scott asked. His tone wasn't accusatory anymore, just confused. He said you used your grandmother's inheritance to pay for his law school, his bar exam fees, the deposit on our first apartment, our wedding. Elena laughed bitterly. $50,000, Scott. Everything my grandmother left me. Darius told me it was an investment in our future. He said once he was making real money, he'd pay it back. He never did. He never even tried. But he said, I know what he said. He said he built his career from nothing. He said he worked 3 jobs while he was in law school. Elena shook her head. He worked 1 job for 6 months before he decided it was too stressful and quit. My grandmother's money and my salary paid for everything else. The group was silent, processing this information. I have the bank records, Julian said quietly. Every transfer, every payment. Elena kept meticulous documentation even during the worst of it. I think part of her always knew she might need proof someday. Why didn't you say anything during the divorce? Bethany asked. Elena sighed. Because I just wanted out. I didn't care about the money anymore. I didn't care about being right. I just wanted to stop feeling like I was dying a little more every day. She met Bethany's eyes. Do you know what it's like to wake up every morning and feel like you've already failed before the day has even started? Do you know what it's like to look in the mirror and see nothing but the person your husband has told you you are? Bethany shook her head slowly. I didn't either until I married Darius. He taught me. Day by day, year by year, he taught me to hate myself. And the worst part is I didn't even realize what was happening until it was almost too late. Tamara had joined the group, standing slightly behind Elena like a protective shadow. Tell them about the art show, she said quietly. Elena closed her eyes. This was the part she had never told anyone except Julian and her therapist. 2 years into our marriage, I got an opportunity. A gallery owner saw some of my work and wanted to include me in a group exhibition. It wasn't a huge deal, just a small show in a local gallery, but it was something. It was proof that maybe Darius was wrong about my talent. What happened? Jennifer asked. I told Darius about it. I was so excited. I thought he'd be happy for me. Elena's voice dropped. He told me the gallery owner was probably just being polite. He said I shouldn't embarrass myself by accepting. He said people would laugh at me, and then they'd laugh at him for having a wife who thought she was an artist. She opened her eyes, finding the memory easier to face than she had expected. I called the gallery owner the next day and declined. I told her I wasn't ready. She was confused. She said my work was exactly what she was looking for, but I couldn't hear her. All I could hear was Darius's voice telling me I wasn't good enough. Elena. Courtney's voice was thick with emotion. That's awful. That was my life. For 8 years, that was my life. Elena straightened her shoulders. But it's not my life anymore. I finished my degree. I built a career. I married a man who has never once made me feel small, or stupid, or worthless. And I will not stand here and let Darius rewrite our history just because he can't stand to see me happy. The transformation in the group was visible. The skepticism had faded from their faces, replaced by something that looked like shame. "We should have known," Jennifer said. "We should have seen it." "How could you? Darius was always so charming, so convincing." Elena shook her head. "I lived with him for 8 years, and I still couldn't see it clearly until I was out." Scott ran a hand through his hair. "I feel like an idiot. He called me last month, said he wanted to catch up before the reunion. We talked for an hour. He told me all about how you left him for a richer guy, how he was still heartbroken, how he just wanted to move on, but couldn't stop thinking about you. That's his narrative. It's a good story. It makes him the sympathetic hero and me the villain." Elena's voice was calm now, almost detached. "But it's fiction, Scott. Every word of it." "I believe you." The words came from Bethany, surprising everyone, including herself. "I didn't before, I didn't want to, I guess. But I believe you now." "Thank you." Elena meant it. She hadn't realized how much she needed to be believed until this moment. "What do you want us to do?" Courtney asked. "Should we, I don't know, tell people, correct the record? I don't need you to do anything. I just needed you to know the truth. What you do with it is up to you." Julian's hand tightened on her back. "I think that's enough for tonight. Elena." She nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation with Darius and the confession to her former classmates was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "Wait," Bethany said as Elena turned to go. "Elena, I owe you an apology. For what I said earlier about you trading up about landing on your feet, I was repeating what Darius told me, but that's no excuse. I should have known better." "You should have." Elena's voice wasn't harsh, just honest. "But thank you for saying that." They walked away from the group, Tamara falling into step beside them. The ballroom felt different now, less hostile, less suffocating. People were watching them, but the weight of their gazes had changed. Curiosity instead of judgment. Respect instead of contempt. "How do you feel?" Julian asked quietly. "I don't know. Lighter, maybe. Like I've been carrying something heavy for a long time, and I finally put it down." "You have been carrying something heavy. You've been carrying his lies." "Not anymore." Elena looked up at her husband, seeing the love and pride in his eyes. "I think I finally let them go." They had almost reached the exit when a commotion near the terrace doors caught their attention. A voice, Darius's voice, raised in anger, and another voice, female, sharp and frightened. "You're hurting me. Let go." Elena's blood ran cold. She knew that dynamic. She knew what Darius was capable of when his public facade cracked and there was no audience to perform for. Without thinking, she changed direction and walked toward the terrace. "Elena, wait!" Julian started, but she was already pushing through the French doors, following the sound of Darius's rage. The terrace was lit by strings of fairy lights, casting everything in a soft, deceptive glow. Darius stood near the stone railing, his hand clamped around the wrist of a young woman Elena didn't recognize. She was mid-20s, pretty, wearing a cocktail dress that suggested she was one of the event staff. Her face was pale with fear. "I said I was sorry." Darius was snarling, his voice low and vicious. "Why can't you just accept my apology and stop making a scene? You spilled your drink on me and then blamed me for standing too close. That's not my fault. Everything is always someone else's fault with women like you. Never taking responsibility. Never. Let her go." Elena's voice cut through the night air. Darius spun around, his grip tightening on the woman's wrist. "This is none of your business, Elena. Walk away." "No." She stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Let her go, Darius." "Or what?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. What are you going to do? Run and get your rich husband to fight your battles for you? I don't need anyone to fight my battles. I'm asking you to let her go. The young woman was crying now, tears streaming silently down her face. Elena remembered that feeling, the trapped helplessness, the fear of making things worse by speaking up. She bumped into me, Darius said, his voice taking on a reasonable tone that Elena knew was pure performance. I was just explaining that she should be more careful. You're holding her wrist hard enough to leave bruises. That's not explaining. That's assault. Darius's eyes narrowed. You need to mind your own business. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. Elena stepped closer, still close enough to see the fear flicker behind Darius's rage. Because I know what you are. I know how you treat women when no one's watching. I let you do it to me for 8 years because I was too broken to fight back. I'm not broken anymore. Julian appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with a single glance. Behind him, other guests were gathering, drawn by the raised voices. Mr. Cole? Julian's voice was ice. Release that woman immediately. For a moment, Elena thought Darius would refuse. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the desperate attempt to find an angle, an exit, a way to spin this in his favor. But there was no angle. There was no spin. There were 50 witnesses watching him grip a crying woman's wrist hard enough to leave marks. He let go. The young woman stumbled backward, cradling her wrist against her chest. Elena moved to her side immediately. Are you okay? I think so. He was so angry. I accidentally bumped his arm and his drink spilled and he just, I know. Elena put an arm around her shoulders. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Darius was standing alone now, the fairy lights casting strange shadows across his face. Without his charm, without his audience, without the performance he had maintained all night, he looked diminished, smaller. Just a man who had lost control and been caught. This is ridiculous, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I barely touched her. We all saw you, Darius. The voice came from Scott Peterson, who had pushed his way to the front of the crowd. We all saw you grab her. Scott, come on. You know me. You know I would never. I thought I knew you. Scott's voice was flat. Elena just spent 20 minutes telling us what kind of man you really are. I didn't want to believe her, but I believe what I just saw. The murmur that went through the crowd was damning. These were Darius's people, his allies, his supporters, the jury he had worked so hard to win over. And they were looking at him with something that wasn't sympathy. It was disgust. Bethany Morrison pushed forward, her face pale. Darius, I think you should leave. Bethany. Now, before someone calls the police. The word police seemed to snap something in Darius. The last remnants of his composure shattered. This is insane, he shouted. I'm the victim here. Elena has been poisoning everyone against me all night, and now you're all just believing her lies. We watched you assault a woman, Darius. Tamara's voice was cold. That wasn't a lie. That was real time. I didn't assault anyone. She was... He looked around wildly, searching for a sympathetic face and finding none. This is Elena's fault. She's been manipulating this whole situation since she walked through the door. Her and her billionaire husband, they planned this. We didn't plan anything. Elena's voice was steady. You did this to yourself, Darius. You spent all night trying to destroy my reputation, and now you've destroyed your own. For a moment, they faced each other across the terrace, ex-wife and ex-husband victim and abuser, the woman who had escaped, and the man who couldn't let go. Elena saw the exact moment when Darius realized he had lost. Not just tonight, but everything. His reputation, his standing, the carefully constructed image he had spent 15 years building. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and venomous. Both of you. I will make you regret this. Julian stepped forward, placing himself between Darius and Elena. That sounded like a threat, Mr. Cole. Would you like to repeat it for the recording? He held up his phone. The screen showed an active voice memo. Darius's face went white. I suggest you leave, Julian continued. And I suggest you think very carefully before contacting my wife again. Because the documentation I mentioned earlier, it's not just bank records and emails. It's everything, Mr. Cole. Every text message, every voicemail, every incident that Elena was too afraid to report during your marriage. You can't. I can. And I will if you give me any reason to. Consider this your final warning. For a long moment, Darius didn't move. Elena could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the fury battling against self-preservation, the desire for revenge, wrestling with the reality of his situation. Self-preservation won. Without another word, he turned and walked off the terrace, disappearing through a side gate into the darkness of the parking lot. A few moments later, they heard an engine start and tires squeal on pavement. He was gone. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knees felt weak. Her heart was racing, but beneath it all was something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Julian's arm came around her shoulders. It's over, he said quietly. Is it? For tonight at least. We'll deal with whatever comes next together. The young woman the event staff member Darius had grabbed approached them hesitantly. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling, for stepping in. I didn't know what to do. He was so angry and I couldn't. You don't have to explain. Elena took her hands gently. What's your name? Melissa. Melissa, can I see your wrist? The girl extended her arm. Even in the dim light, Elena could see the red marks that would become bruises by morning. You should document this, she said. Take photos. Write down exactly what happened while it's still fresh. Should I call the police? Elena looked at Julian, who nodded. That's your decision, Elena said. But what he did to you was assault. You have every right to report it. And if you do, you'll have plenty of witnesses. Melissa looked around at the crowd that still lingered on the terrace, classmates, staff members, people who had watched Darius lose control. I'll think about it, she said finally. Thank you, both of you. She walked away, cradling her wrist, and the crowd began to disperse. The confrontation was over, but the reverberations would last long after tonight. Tamara appeared at Elena's side. Well, she said dryly, that was definitely the most dramatic reunion I've ever attended, and I went to theater camp. Elena laughed, surprising herself. I didn't plan any of this. I know. That's what makes it so perfect. Tamara hugged her tightly. I'm proud of you, Elena, for standing up to him, for telling the truth, for being the woman I always knew you could be. The words hit Elena somewhere deep in a place she had kept locked away for years. I couldn't have done it without you, she said. Either of you. Julian pulled her close. You did all the hard work. We just showed up. That's not true. Elena looked up at him, at this man who had shown her what love actually looked like. You showed up. That's everything. They stood together on the terrace, the party continuing inside, without them the night air cool against Elena's flushed skin. Somewhere in the distance, Darius was driving away from everything he had built, everything he had destroyed, everything he had lost. And Elena was finally free. The ballroom felt different when they walked back inside. The atmosphere had shifted in some subtle but unmistakable way, conversations stopping and starting as they passed, people nodding in acknowledgement, a few even offering words of support. Elena, I just heard what happened on the terrace. Are you okay? That took incredible courage. I'm so sorry we didn't see it sooner. If you ever need anything, a lawyer, a witness, whatever, you let me know. The people who had been so quick to judge her just hours ago were now falling over themselves to express solidarity. Part of Elena wanted to be cynical about it. They had believed Darius without question after all, but a larger part of her understood. They had been manipulated, just like she had been. How are you holding up? Julian murmured as they made their way toward a quiet corner. Better than I expected. Elena squeezed his hand. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 7 years, and I finally exhaled. The night's not over yet. We can leave whenever you want. Not yet. Elena looked around the ballroom at the faces she had known for more than half her life. There's something I still need to do. She found Bethany Morrison standing alone near the bar, her earlier confidence replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Bethany. The woman turned, her expression guarded. Elena. I wanted to say again how sorry I am. For everything. I feel terrible about. Can I ask you something? Bethany nodded slowly. When did Darius first reach out to you? Before the reunion, I mean. Bethany's face reddened. About 3 weeks ago. He said he wanted to reconnect with old friends. We talked on the phone a few times. He seemed so... She stopped searching for the right word. Wounded, Elena supplied. Yes, exactly. He talked about your divorce like it still hurt him, like he had never really gotten over it. What did he tell you about why we split up? Bethany looked uncomfortable. He said you changed, that you became obsessed with money and status after his career took off, that you started looking down on him, treating him like he wasn't good enough. He said you met Julian through some charity event, and that was it, you were gone. Elena nodded. It was almost exactly what she had expected. The truth is, I met Julian 3 months after the divorce was finalized. The divorce that Darius initiated, not me. He started an affair with a paralegal from his office, and when I found out, he told me I was being dramatic and that I should be grateful he had put up with me as long as he had. Bethany's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Elena. He filed for divorce 2 weeks later. He didn't fight for our marriage because he had already decided it was over. The whole heartbroken ex-husband routine he's been performing for the past 7 years, it's a lie. He's the one who left. He's the one who cheated. He's the one who decided our marriage wasn't worth saving. Why didn't you ever say anything? Elena sighed. Because I was ashamed. Because I believed on some level that it was my fault. That if I had been a better wife, a more interesting person, a more supportive partner, he wouldn't have needed someone else. She shook her head. It took me years of therapy to understand that his choices had nothing to do with my worth. Bethany was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you, I don't know. A reckoning, maybe. For believing him without question. For spreading his lies to other people. You didn't know. I should have asked. I should have reached out to you before I decided who was telling the truth. Bethany wiped at her eyes. I was so quick to believe the worst about you because God, this is terrible, because your life looked so perfect. The billionaire husband, the glamorous career, the magazine spreads. I think I wanted you to be the villain because it made me feel better about my own life. It was more honesty than Elena had expected. More self-awareness than she had given Bethany credit for. I understand, Elena said. More than you know. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 women who had orbited the same social circle for decades without ever truly seeing each other. What happens now? Bethany asked finally. Now I go home with my husband. I sleep better than I have in months. And tomorrow, I start living my life without looking over my shoulder for the first time since my divorce. And Darius? Elena considered the question. Darius has to live with the consequences of his own choices. Whatever happens to him from here professionally, personally, socially, is the result of decisions he made. I don't wish him harm, but I'm done protecting him from the truth. Julian appeared at her elbow. Ready to go? Elena nodded, but before she turned away, she put a hand on Bethany's arm. For what it's worth, I don't blame you. Any of you. Darius is incredibly convincing. He convinced me for 8 years that I was worthless, and I was living with him. You never stood a chance. Bethany's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but we all deserve the chance to do better. Elena walked away, leaving Bethany standing alone with her guilt. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something close to understanding. They collected their coats and made their way toward the exit. The party was still going on, music playing, champagne flowing, conversations continuing, but it felt muted now. Secondary. The real drama of the evening was over. In the lobby, they ran into David Chen, the quiet tech developer who had been kind to Elena earlier in the evening. "Elena, I heard what happened on the terrace." His face was serious. "Are you all right?" "I am. Thank you for asking." I always knew there was something off about Darius. Even in high school. He was too smooth, too perfect. David shook his head. "I'm sorry I never said anything. To you or anyone else." "You couldn't have known." "Maybe. But I could have paid more attention. We all could have." He looked at Julian. "Take care of her. She deserves it." "I know she does." Julian shook David's hand. "Thank you." They stepped out into the night air. The parking lot was nearly empty now, most guests still inside enjoying the party that had taken such an unexpected turn. Their town car was waiting, the driver already holding the door open. Elena paused before getting in. "Julian." "Yes. Thank you. For coming early. For everything you said. For—" she struggled to find the words. "For seeing me. The real me. Not the version Darius created." Julian cupped her face in his hands. "The real you is the only version I've ever seen. From the very first night we met. I was a mess that night. Crying in a hospital chapel, barely holding myself together. You were grieving. You were scared. You were human." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. "And you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Not because of how you looked, but because of how you felt. You were completely authentic in a world full of people pretending to be something they're not." Elena felt tears welling up, but these weren't tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of love. "I spent 8 years believing I wasn't worth loving," she whispered. "And then you came along and loved me anyway." "Not anyway." Julian's voice was fierce. "Because I loved you because of who you are. Because of what you survived. Because of the strength it took to walk away from a man who had convinced you that you couldn't survive without him." He kissed her, then gently, reverently in the parking lot of the Piedmont Country Club, while a handful of strangers walked past and pretended not to notice. When they finally pulled apart, Elena was smiling. "Take me home," she said. "Always." They got into the car, the driver closing the door behind them. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Elena looked back at the country club one last time. The building was lit up like a beacon, music and laughter drifting through the open windows. She had walked into that building terrified of what Darius would do to her. She was leaving with something she hadn't expected to find. Closure. Not the neat Hollywood kind where all the wounds are healed and all the questions are answered. Real closure was messier than that. It was the knowledge that she had faced her greatest fear and survived. That she had spoken her truth even when her voice was shaking. That she had refused to let the man who had tried to destroy her succeed. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness of the car. "I'm thinking about how different my life would be if I had never left him." "You would have left eventually. You're too strong not to." "I didn't feel strong. For 8 years I felt like a shadow. Like I was disappearing a little more every day. And now—" Elena turned to look at her husband, at his kind eyes and gentle smile, at the man who had shown her that love didn't have to hurt. "Now I feel like I'm finally becoming the woman I was always meant to be." The car carried them through the night, away from the reunion, away from Darius, away from all the ghosts that had haunted Elena for so long. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There might be fallout from tonight, professional consequences for Darius, social ripples through their shared network of friends and acquaintances. The young woman, Melissa, might decide to press charges. The story might spread beyond the walls of the Piedmont Country Club into the broader Atlanta social scene. But all of that was for tomorrow. Tonight, Elena Ashford was going home with the man who loved her. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she truly knew that she was worthy of that love. The morning sun filtered through the bedroom windows, casting golden patterns across the sheets. Elena had slept deeper than she had in years. No nightmares, no restless tossing, no waking at 3 a.m. with Darius's voice echoing in her head. She reached across the bed and found Julian's side, empty but still warm. The smell of coffee drifted up from somewhere downstairs. For a long moment, she simply lay there, letting the events of the previous night replay in her mind. The confrontation, the truth-telling, the moment on the terrace when she had stepped between Darius and his victim without even thinking. She had surprised herself. The woman who had spent 8 years shrinking, hiding, apologizing for her existence. That woman had finally stood up. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Then again. Then a third time. Elena reached for it, expecting messages from Tamara. Instead, she found her inbox flooded with notifications. Facebook messages, Instagram DMs, text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. The first one was from Jennifer Hayes. Elena. I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about everything you said. I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. The second was from Courtney Williams. I just wanted you to know that I told my sister everything that happened. She's a family law attorney. She said what Darius did to you sounds like textbook coercive control. She also said Melissa should definitely press charges. The third was from a number she didn't recognize. Hi Elena, this is Melissa from last night. The catering manager gave me your number. I wanted to thank you again. I decided to file a police report this morning. Would you be willing to give a statement about what you witnessed? Elena sat up slowly, the weight of these messages settling over her. The ripples from last night were already spreading further than she had anticipated. You're awake. Julian stood in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He was still in his pajamas, his graying hair slightly disheveled, looking nothing like the intimidating figure who had faced down Darius the night before. I'm awake, Elena confirmed. And apparently so is half of Atlanta. My phone has been going crazy. Julian handed her a cup and settled beside her on the bed. What are people saying? Apologies mostly. People who believed Darius and now feel guilty about it. She scrolled through her messages. Jennifer Hayes, Courtney Williams, a few others, and Melissa, the girl from the terrace. She's filing a police report. She wants me to give a statement. Are you going to? Yes. Elena didn't hesitate. I watched him assault her. If my testimony can help her case, I'll do it. Julian nodded, unsurprised. You should eat something first. It's going to be a long day. They went downstairs together, the penthouse quiet around them. Elena made toast while Julian checked his own phone, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. What is it? She asked. News travels fast in Atlanta. He turned the screen toward her. Someone posted about it last night on social media. It's already been shared several hundred times. Elena took the phone, her stomach tightening. The post was from someone she vaguely remembered, a woman who had been at the reunion, but hadn't been part of the central drama. Just witnessed the most insane thing at my high school reunion. Darius Cole. You know, the hotshot lawyer who's always in the society pages, spent half the night bad-mouthing his ex-wife in front of everyone. Called her a gold digger, said she abandoned him for a billionaire, the whole 9 yards. Then her actual husband showed up and basically destroyed him with facts. Pulled out receipts about how she paid for his law school, how he cheated on her, how the whole poor abandoned husband story was complete BS. Then, and this is the crazy part, Darius grabbed some catering girl on the terrace and his ex-wife had to intervene. Literally stood between them. The guy is unhinged. I always thought he was so charming, but apparently it was all an act. Mind blown. The post had 847 shares and over 2,000 comments. Oh God, Elena breathed. It's going to get bigger before it gets smaller, Julian said quietly. Darius has a lot of enemies. People he's beaten in court, colleagues he's stepped on to get ahead. They're going to come out of the woodwork now that there's blood in the water. I didn't want this. I just wanted to tell the truth. Julian took her hands. That's what you did. What happens next isn't your responsibility. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she had set something in motion that she couldn't control. She had wanted closure. She hadn't wanted to destroy Darius's entire life. Had she? The question unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Her phone rang. Tamara's face flashed on the screen. Have you seen the internet? Tamara's voice was breathless with excitement. You're basically famous. Well, not you specifically, they don't know your name yet, but the story is everywhere. Someone's calling it Reunion Reckoning. There's a hashtag and everything. I saw. Elena rubbed her temples. I don't know how I feel about it. How you feel, Elena, this is amazing. Darius spent 7 years telling everyone you were the villain, and in one night the whole narrative flipped. People are celebrating you. They don't even know who I am. They know enough. They know a woman stood up to her abusive ex-husband in front of everyone. They know she protected a stranger from being hurt. They know she told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. Tamara's voice softened. You're a hero, Elena, whether you wanted to be or not. Elena didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted and overwhelmed and strangely guilty. I need to give a statement to the police, she said. Melissa is pressing charges. Good for her, and good for you for supporting her. There was a pause. How are you really doing? Not the public-facing version. The real version. Elena looked across the kitchen at Julian, who was pretending to read the newspaper while clearly listening to every word. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that this is going to blow up in ways I can't predict. I'm scared that Darius is going to retaliate. I'm scared that... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. That part of me wanted this. That part of me wanted to see him destroyed. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. What does that make me? Tamara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. It makes you human, Elena. It makes you someone who was hurt badly and who wanted the person who hurt you to face consequences. That's not vengeance. That's justice. Is there a difference? Yes, vengeance is about making someone suffer. Justice is about making the truth known. Tamara's voice firmed. You told the truth last night. What people do with that truth isn't your responsibility. After they hung up, Elena sat at the kitchen island, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Julian set down his newspaper and came to stand beside her. You're doing the thing again, he said. What thing? The thing where you take responsibility for everyone else's choices. He put his hand over hers. Darius chose to humiliate you publicly. Darius chose to grab that young woman. Darius chose to spend 7 years lying about your marriage. Those were his decisions. The consequences belong to him. I know. Logically, I know. Elena looked up at him. But I keep thinking about who he used to be, before he became this person. When we first started dating, he was kind. He was supportive. He believed in me. Did he just tell you what you wanted to hear until he had you locked in? The question hit Elena like a splash of cold water. She had asked herself the same thing in therapy 100 times. She still didn't have a clear answer. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know if the good version of Darius was ever real, or if I just wanted it to be real so badly that I convinced myself. Does it matter? It matters to me, because if the good version was real, then something broke him. Something turned him into this. And maybe part of that was my fault. Julian's expression shifted. He pulled a chair close and sat down facing her, their knees touching. Listen to me. I've read those emails he sent you. I've seen the text messages. I've heard you describe in detail the psychological warfare he waged against you for 8 years. His voice was steady, but fierce. That is not something a good person does. That is not something a person becomes because their wife failed them in some way. That is a pattern of behavior that exists because the person choosing it believes they have the right to control and diminish another human being. But there is no but, Elena. You did not break him. You did not create him. You did not deserve what he did to you. Julian's hands tightened on hers. And you are not responsible for cleaning up the mess that he is now facing because his true nature was finally exposed. Elena felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. I just wish I could stop caring. I wish I could watch him fall apart and feel nothing. That's not who you are, That's never been who you are. Julian lifted one hand to touch her face. Your capacity for compassion, even for people who have hurt you, is one of the things I love most about you. But compassion doesn't mean accepting responsibility for someone else's destruction. Darius destroyed himself. All you did was refuse to be complicit in his lies anymore. The doorbell rang, shattering the moment. Julian frowned. Are you expecting anyone? No. He stood and walked toward the front door. Elena heard muffled voices, then footsteps approaching. Julian returned with a uniformed police officer behind him, Mrs. Ashford. I'm Detective Marcus Webb with the Atlanta Police Department. I understand you witnessed an incident last night at the Piedmont Country Club. Elena rose, smoothing her hair with one hand. Yes, I saw Darius Cole grab a young woman's wrist and refuse to let go when she asked. Ms. Melissa Turner has filed a formal complaint. She indicated that you intervened directly. Would you be willing to provide a detailed statement? Yes, absolutely. Detective Webb nodded. I can take your statement here, or you can come down to the station. Whatever makes you more comfortable. Here is fine. Elena looked at Julian. Can my husband stay? Of course. They moved to the living room. Detective Webb pulled out a notepad and a small recording device. Just tell me what you saw in your own words. Start from the beginning. Elena took a deep breath and began to recount the events on the terrace. The sound of Darius's angry voice, the young woman's frightened plea, the moment Elena had pushed through the French doors and seen his hand locked around Melissa's wrist. What did you do when you saw them? Detective Webb asked. I told him to let her go. And how did he respond? He told me it was none of my business. He said I should walk away. But you didn't. No. Elena's voice was firm. I couldn't. I knew what he was capable of. I couldn't leave her alone with him. Detective Webb made a note. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean you knew what he was capable of? Elena hesitated. This was the part she had dreaded, the part where her own history with Darius became relevant to the official record. Darius Cole is my ex-husband, she said finally. We were married for 8 years. During that time, he was emotionally and psychologically abusive. He never hit me, but he didn't need to. He found other ways to hurt me. The detective's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. I see. And you believe last night's incident was consistent with that pattern of behavior? Yes. When Darius feels threatened or embarrassed, he lashes out. He tries to regain control by dominating whoever is nearest. Last night I had just confronted him about his lies in front of our former classmates. He was humiliated. He was angry. And Melissa was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Did you feel physically threatened? No, Darius has always been careful about that. He knows that physical violence leaves evidence. What he does is more subtle, but it's just as damaging. Detective Webb continued asking questions for another half hour. What exactly had Darius said? How had Melissa reacted? Who else had witnessed the incident? What had happened after Darius left? Elena answered everything as completely as she could. Julian, a silent but supportive presence beside her. When it was finally over, Detective Webb stood and shook her hand. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Ashford. Your statement will be very helpful. What happens now? We'll continue our investigation. We already have statements from several other witnesses who corroborate your account. Based on the evidence I expect, we'll be filing charges against Mr. Cole. What kind of charges? Assault at minimum. Possibly more depending on what else comes to light. The detective paused. Mrs. Ashford, I should tell you this isn't the first complaint we've received about Darius Cole. Elena's heart stuttered. What do you mean? I can't share details of ongoing investigations, but I can tell you that last night's incident has prompted other individuals to come forward. It seems Mr. Cole has a pattern of behavior that extends beyond his marriage to you. The words hung in the air long after Detective Webb left. Other individuals. A pattern of behavior. Elena had suspected, of course. Men like Darius didn't limit their cruelty to one victim. But hearing it confirmed, knowing that other women had suffered because she had stayed silent for so long, was devastating. "This isn't your fault," Julian said, reading her expression. "Isn't it? If I had spoken up sooner." "If you had spoken up sooner, no one would have believed you. You said it yourself, Darius was too charming, too convincing. It took what happened last night, a public meltdown in front of dozens of witnesses, for people to finally see the truth. But other women made their own choices about whether to report him, just like you made yours." Julian's voice was gentle but firm. "You were surviving, Elena. That's all any of us can do when we're trapped in a situation like that. Survive." The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and messages. More apologies from former classmates. More expressions of support from people Elena barely remembered. A message from the Piedmont Country Club's event coordinator apologizing for any distress caused by the incident and offering a full refund on the reunion tickets. By late afternoon, Elena felt like she had been through a washing machine, wrung out and tumbled dry. She was standing at the window watching the Atlanta skyline fade into twilight when her phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. "Hello? Is this Elena Ashford?" The voice was female, hesitant. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I think you know who I am." Elena's breath caught. Sarah Mitchell, the paralegal, the woman Darius had cheated with. "Yes," Elena said slowly. "I know who you are. I saw what happened online, the posts about the reunion." Sarah's voice was shaking slightly. "I need to talk to you, in person if possible. There are things you should know about Darius, things that might help." Elena looked at Julian, who had moved closer, his expression questioning. "What kind of things?" "I can't say over the phone, but please, I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything after what I did, but please, give me a chance to explain." Every instinct told Elena to refuse. This was the woman who had slept with her husband, the woman who had been part of Darius's betrayal, the woman whose existence had been the final straw that pushed Elena out the door. But something in Sarah's voice, something desperate and frightened, made her pause. "Where do you want to meet?" "There's a coffee shop on Peachtree near the Midtown MARTA station. Do you know it?" "I can find it. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Elena hesitated. Julian was watching her intently, clearly trying to piece together the conversation from her half of it. "Okay," she said finally. 10 o'clock. I'll be there." She hung up and met Julian's eyes. "That was Sarah Mitchell." "The paralegal?" "Yes. She wants to meet me. She says she has information about Darius." Julian's expression darkened. "Elena, I don't think that's a good idea." "Neither do I, but I'm going to do it anyway." "Why?" Elena turned back to the window, watching the city lights flicker to life below. "Because whatever Darius has done to me, to Melissa, to whoever else has come forward, it didn't happen in a vacuum. There were other people involved. Other people who saw things, who knew things, who stayed silent." She took a deep breath. "Sarah was there, Julian. She was in his world when I wasn't anymore. If she has information that can help build a case against him, I need to hear it. And if it's a trap, if Darius put her up to this, then at least I'll know." Elena turned to face him. "I can't live my life being afraid of what he might do anymore. I spent 8 years in that prison. I'm not going back." Julian studied her for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face must have satisfied him, because he finally nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." "Julian, not into the meeting, but I'll be nearby, close enough to help if something goes wrong." His voice left no room for argument. "That's non-negotiable, Elena." She wanted to protest. She wanted to prove that she could handle this on her own. But the truth was, she didn't want to face Sarah Mitchell alone. She didn't want to face any of this alone. "Okay," she said. "You can come." Julian pulled her into his arms, and for a long moment, they simply stood there, holding each other against the gathering darkness. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new challenges, new confrontations with a past Elena had thought she'd left behind. But tonight, she was safe. She was loved. And she was finally beginning to believe that she deserved to be. The coffee shop was quieter than Elena had expected. At 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, most of the professional crowd had already gotten their caffeine and disappeared into nearby office buildings. She chose a table in the back corner facing the door and ordered a tea she didn't really want. Julian was across the street at a bookstore close enough to reach her in under a minute if needed. They had agreed on a text message with a single word if anything felt wrong. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened, and Sarah Mitchell walked in. Elena recognized her immediately, though they had never formally met. Darius had shown her photos once early in the affair, when he was still denying everything and trying to convince Elena that she was being paranoid. "This is Sarah, my new paralegal. See how plain she is. Why would I be interested in someone like that?" Sarah wasn't plain. She was striking, in fact, tall and slender, with sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes. But right now, those eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted, and she moved with the hunched posture of someone who hadn't slept in days. She spotted Elena and hesitated, clearly bracing herself. Then she squared her shoulders and walked toward the table. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the chair across from Elena. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." Elena's voice was cooler than she intended. "But you said you had information about Darius." "I do." Sarah's hands were trembling as she wrapped them around the cup of coffee she had ordered at the counter. "But first, I need to apologize. For everything. For what I did to you." "You didn't do anything to me. Darius did." "I was part of it. I knew he was married. I knew he was telling you lies about working late and going to conferences. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that if he was going to cheat, it would be with someone, and it might as well be me." Sarah's voice cracked. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. And I'm sorry." Elena studied the woman across from her. The apology seemed more genuine than anything Darius had ever offered. "Why now?" she asked. "It's been 7 years. Why are you reaching out now?" Sarah took a shaky breath. "Because I'm one of the other people." "Other people?" "The police said other individuals had come forward. I'm one of them." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "After you left, after the divorce was finalized, I thought things would be different. I thought I was special. I thought he actually loved me." Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. "He convinced you that you were different," she said. "That the problems in our marriage were my fault. That with you, he would be the man he was always meant to be." Sarah nodded miserably. "For about 6 months it was wonderful. He was attentive and romantic and everything I had dreamed about. And then..." She stopped, struggling to compose herself. "And then he started to change." Yes. The word was barely a whisper. It was subtle at first. Little comments about my appearance. Suggestions about how I could improve myself. He started questioning my work, my friends, my family. He made me feel like I was lucky he was willing to put up with me. Elena recognized every word, every pattern, every carefully calculated tactic. "He isolated you," she said. "Completely. Within a year I had no one. My friends had given up on me. My family thought I had lost my mind. All I had was Darius, and Darius made sure I knew how grateful I should be for that." How long did it last? 3 years. 3 years of walking on eggshells, of never knowing what would set him off, of apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Sarah wiped her eyes with a napkin. "He never hit me either. He didn't have to. He knew exactly how to hurt me without leaving marks." Elena felt the old familiar anger rising. Not at Sarah, not anymore. At Darius. At the man who had perfected the art of destruction and wielded it against woman after woman without consequence. "What finally made you leave?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "I didn't leave. He discarded me. Found someone new, another paralegal at a different firm. One day he just told me it was over, that I had become boring, that he needed someone who could keep up with him." The phrase hit Elena like a physical blow. Become boring. Darius had used those exact words when he told her he wanted a divorce. He's still using the same script, Elena said quietly. It works. Why would he change it? Sarah's voice hardened. After I was out, it took me years to understand what had happened. Years of therapy, years of rebuilding my self-esteem from nothing. And the whole time I watched him move on to the next victim and the next, and I couldn't say anything because who would believe me? He's Darius Cole, successful attorney, pillar of the community, charming, handsome, brilliant. Until last night. Sarah met Elena's eyes. When I saw those posts when I read about what happened at the reunion, I finally felt like maybe someone would listen. Maybe people would finally see what he really is. Elena sat back in her chair processing everything she had heard. The patterns were identical. The tactics were identical. Darius had simply moved from victim to victim, refining his technique, leaving a trail of broken women in his wake. You said you had information, Elena said. Information that might help. What did you mean? Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She slid it across the table. I kept everything. Emails, text messages, voicemails, screenshots of conversations where he threatened me, where he admitted to things he did to you, where he bragged about manipulating people. She swallowed hard. I know I should have come forward sooner, but I was scared, I was ashamed, and I thought no one would believe me over him. Elena opened the envelope and began flipping through the contents. There were dozens of pages printouts of emails, transcripts of text messages, photographs of handwritten notes. One email jumped out at her immediately. It was dated 3 months after their divorce, sent from Darius to Sarah. Finally got the dumb bitch to sign the papers. Took long enough. She actually believed I loved her. Can you imagine? 8 years of playing the devoted husband, and she never figured out that I was just using her to fund my career. Her grandmother's money paid for everything, and she's too stupid to even ask for any of it back. Sometimes I can't believe how easy it is to manipulate people. Elena's hands were shaking. She had suspected. She had known on some level that Darius had never really loved her. But seeing it spelled out so coldly, so casually, so cruelly, it took her breath away. There's more, Sarah said quietly. A lot more, including messages where he talks about what he did to other women, before you, after me. He kept a running tally. Like it was a game to him. A game. That's how he sees it. Conquest. Control. Power. Sarah's voice was hollow. He doesn't see us as people. He sees us as challenges to be conquered and discarded. Elena closed the envelope. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clearer than it had been in years. Why are you giving this to me? Because you're the one who finally exposed him. You're the one who stood up in front of everyone and told the truth. Sarah leaned forward. I couldn't do what you did. I was too broken, too scared. But you were brave, Elena, and I want to help you finish what you started. What I started was just supposed to be closure, for me. I never intended to destroy him. Sarah's smile was grim. Maybe not, but you did. And now that the door is open, the rest of us can finally walk through it. Elena looked at the envelope in her hands. Inside were the weapons she needed to ensure that Darius Cole never hurt another woman again. I need to show this to the police, she said. I know. I already made copies for Detective Webb. He's expecting me this afternoon. Sarah stood up, gathering her purse. I just wanted you to have this first. So you could see, so you could understand that you weren't crazy. Everything you felt, everything you suspected, everything you doubted about yourself because he made you doubt it, it was all real. He did those things. He is that person. And it was never, ever your fault. Elena stood as well, the envelope clutched against her chest. Sarah. The other woman paused. Thank you. For coming forward. For being brave enough to share this. Sarah's eyes glistened. Thank you for going first. I don't know if I could have done it without you. She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Elena alone with the weight of everything she had just learned. Julian appeared in the doorway moments later, his expression concerned. "I saw her leave. Are you okay?" Elena looked down at the envelope. Inside was proof of everything she had survived, everything she had doubted, everything Darius had tried to convince her was her imagination. "I'm okay," she said. "Actually, I think I might be better than okay." Julian crossed the cafe and took her hand. "What did she give you?" "The truth. Finally, after all these years." Elena met his eyes. "It's over, Julian. Really over. He can't hurt anyone anymore." 3 months later, Elena stood before a canvas for the first time in over a decade. The brush felt foreign in her hand, like a language she had once spoken fluently, but had forgotten over years of silence. She stared at the blank white surface, her heart pounding with something between terror and anticipation. "You don't have to do this today," Julian said from the doorway of the studio he had converted for her from a spare room in their penthouse. "There's no deadline." "I know." Elena dipped the brush into a pool of cerulean blue. "But I've been waiting long enough." The first stroke was hesitant. The second was bolder. By the third, something inside her had broken loose, a dam that had been holding back a flood of creativity for 15 years. She painted for 6 hours without stopping. When she finally stepped back, exhausted and exhilarated, the canvas was covered in swirling colors that seemed to pulse with emotion. It wasn't a picture of anything specific. It was a feeling made visible, the feeling of breaking free. Julian had fallen asleep on the small couch in the corner waiting for her. Elena looked at him, this man who had never once told her what she should be, only asked what she wanted to become, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She had spent so many years believing she was broken, believing she was worthless, believing that the best she could hope for was survival. She had been wrong. The weeks since Sarah Mitchell's revelations had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media attention. 4 more women had come forward with stories remarkably similar to Elena's and Sarah's. 4 more victims of Darius Cole's systematic manipulation and abuse. Detective Webb had built a case that was, in his words, airtight. Melissa Turner's assault charge had been just the beginning. When prosecutors reviewed the evidence from Sarah's files and the testimonies of the other women, they had added charges of stalking harassment and financial fraud. Darius's law firm had terminated his partnership. The State Bar Association had opened an investigation into his professional conduct. His carefully constructed empire was crumbling around him, brick by brick. Elena had followed the news with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Not sorrow for Darius. He deserved everything that was coming to him, but sorrow for the years she had lost, the dreams she had abandoned, the woman she might have become if she had never met him. "Stop," her therapist had said during their last session. "You can't mourn the life you didn't live. You can only build the life you want now." So that's what Elena was doing. Building, painting, becoming. Her phone buzzed on the windowsill. She glanced at the screen and saw Tamara's name. "Turn on Channel 5, Tamara said without preamble. "Right now." Elena grabbed the remote and clicked on the small television in the corner of the studio. Julian stirred at the sound, blinking awake. The screen showed a courthouse reporters clustered on the steps, cameras flashing. A news ticker scrolled across the bottom. Prominent Atlanta attorney Darius Cole pleads guilty to multiple charges. "He took a plea deal," Tamara said, her voice breathless. 18 months in prison plus 5 years probation. He'll be disbarred. His career is over. Elena sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "It's really over. It's really over." Julian was beside her now, his hand on her shoulder. "What happened?" "Darius pleaded guilty. He's going to prison." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The news anchor's voice filled the silence, recounting the charges, the evidence, the unprecedented number of victims who had come forward to testify. "How do you feel?" Julian asked finally. Elena considered the question carefully. She had expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, maybe even relieved. What she actually felt was something more complicated, something quieter. "I feel free," she said. "Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even know I was carrying, and someone just lifted it off my shoulders." That's exactly what happened. I kept thinking for years, I kept thinking that someday he would admit what he did, that he would apologize, that he would finally see me as a person instead of a thing he owned. Elena shook her head slowly. That was never going to happen. He's not capable of it. But this is something. This is accountability, even if it's not the same as remorse. Julian pulled her close. He doesn't need to be sorry for you to be healed. Those are two different things. I'm starting to understand that. The television showed footage of Darius being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs, his head bowed, his famous charm nowhere in evidence. He looked diminished, ordinary, just a man facing the consequences of his choices. Elena watched without flinching. "I used to be so afraid of him," she said quietly. "He seemed so powerful, so untouchable. I thought he would always have this hold over me no matter how far I ran. And now I see him for what he really is. A bully, a coward, a man who could only feel strong by making others weak." She turned off the television. "He's not my monster anymore. He's just a man going to prison." The phone rang again. This time it was Detective Webb. "Mrs. Ashford, I wanted you to hear it from me before the media ran with it. The plea deal is finalized. He'll be sentenced formally next month, but the terms are set. 18 months, 5 years probation, mandatory counseling, and permanent disbarment." "Thank you for letting me know, Detective. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Without your testimony, without what happened at that reunion, none of this would have been possible. The other victims have said the same thing. You gave them permission to tell their stories." Elena felt tears threatening again. "I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the most special thing anyone can do." Detective Webb's voice softened. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Ashford. You've earned some peace." After she hung up, Elena walked to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline. The city where she had met Darius. The city where she had lost herself. The city where she had been found again. "I want to do something," she said. Julian came to stand beside her. "What kind of something?" "The other women. Sarah, Melissa, the ones who came forward. They were so brave. And there are so many more out there. Women who are still trapped, still believing the lies their partners tell them, still thinking they deserve to be treated that way." Elena turned to face him. "I want to help them. Somehow. I don't know how yet, but I want to use what happened to me to make a difference." Julian's face broke into a slow smile. "The Ashford Foundation has been looking for a new initiative, something focused on domestic abuse survivors. I was going to bring it up, but I wanted to wait until you were ready. You knew I would want to do this. I hoped. But it had to be your decision, your calling." Elena thought about all the years she had spent following Darius's dreams instead of her own, supporting his ambitions, disappearing into his shadow. This would be different. This would be hers. "I want to help build something," she said. "Not just write checks. I want to be involved. I want to talk to survivors, listen to their stories, figure out what they actually need." "Then that's what we'll do." Julian took her hand. Together. The formal launch of the Ashford Foundation's Survivor Support Initiative took place 6 months later, on a warm spring evening in downtown Atlanta. Elena stood at the podium looking out at a crowd of donors, advocates, social workers, and survivors. Tamara was in the front row, beaming with pride. Sarah Mitchell sat a few seats away, looking healthier than Elena had ever seen her. Melissa Turner was there too, having traveled from Savannah specifically for the event. Julian stood at the back of the room, giving her space to shine on her own. "A year ago," Elena began, her voice steady, I walked into my high school reunion, terrified of what my ex-husband would say about me. I had spent 7 years trying to rebuild my life after escaping an abusive marriage, but I still carried his voice in my head. His lies. His constant message that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, strong enough to exist without him. The room was silent. Every face turned toward her. That night something changed. Not because my current husband arrived and defended me, although he did, and I'm grateful. Not because my former classmates finally saw the truth about the man they had idolized, although they did, and it mattered. What changed was inside me. For the first time in over a decade, I used my voice. I told my story. I refused to be silent anymore. Elena paused, gathering her thoughts. Abuse thrives in silence. It grows in the dark spaces where victims are too ashamed or too afraid to speak. Abusers count on that silence. They weaponize it. They convince us that no one will believe us, that we're the ones with the problem, that we should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they throw our way. Her voice hardened. They're wrong. They've always been wrong. And it's time we stopped letting them control the narrative. She looked out at the survivors in the audience, women who had shared their stories with her over the past months, women who were still finding the courage to speak. This foundation exists because I finally found my voice. But I don't want my voice to be the only one. I want to create a place where survivors can find their own voices, where they can access the resources, the support, and the community they need to rebuild their lives. Not because someone rescued them, but because they chose to rescue themselves. Applause erupted. Elena waited for it to subside. My ex-husband is in prison now. He pleaded guilty to charges related to his abuse of multiple women over many years. For a long time, I wondered if justice would ever catch up with him. I wondered if anyone would believe me. I wondered if I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to find some new way to hurt me. She shook her head. I don't wonder anymore. The truth came out. Justice was served. And I am standing here today not as his victim, but as a survivor. A thriver. A woman who refused to let her past define her future. She looked at Julian, who was smiling at her with the same quiet pride he had shown on the night of the reunion. I was lucky. I had people who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. A best friend who never gave up on me. A husband who saw my strength even when I felt weak. A therapist who helped me untangle the lies from the truth. Elena's voice softened. Not everyone has those resources. Not everyone has that support. That's why this foundation matters. That's why we're here. After the speech, after the handshakes, and the photographs, and the interviews, Elena found herself standing alone on the terrace of the event venue. The Atlanta skyline glittered before her, the same view she had seen from so many different angles over the years. Julian joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. You were incredible tonight, he said. I was terrified. Those 2 things aren't mutually exclusive. He handed her a glass. To new beginnings. Elena touched her glass to his. To new beginnings. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker below. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Elena asked. If I had never married Darius? If I had finished my degree on my own schedule, pursued my art, built a career without someone constantly tearing me down? Sometimes. Julian's voice was thoughtful. But then I remember that the woman I fell in love with was shaped by everything she went through. The good and the bad. The joy and the pain. He turned to face her. I don't love you despite what happened to you, Elena. I love you because of who you became on the other side of it. Elena felt tears threatening for what seemed like the 100th time that day. But these weren't tears of pain or grief. They were tears of recognition, of acceptance, of finally understanding that her story wasn't a tragedy, it was a transformation. I spent so many years wishing I could erase my marriage to Darius, she said. Wishing I could go back and warn my younger self. But I don't wish that anymore. If I hadn't gone through what I went through, I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't be able to help other women find their way out of the darkness. And you wouldn't have met me in that hospital chapel, Julian added. No, I wouldn't have. Elena leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Some things have to break before they can be rebuilt stronger. They stayed on the terrace until the last of the guests had departed, until the catering staff had packed up the tables and the lights had been dimmed. Then they walked hand in hand to the waiting car, ready to go home. 1 year after the reunion, Elena received a letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope with a prison return address. She recognized Darius's handwriting immediately, the same aggressive slant, the same cramped letters. She almost threw it away unopened. But something made her hesitate. You don't have to read it, Julian said, watching her from across the kitchen. I know. Elena turned the envelope over in her hands. But I think I want to. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Elena, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But my court-ordered therapist says I need to take accountability for the harm I've caused, so here I am. I was wrong. About everything. The way I treated you, the things I said, the lies I told, it was all wrong. I told myself I was the victim, that you had abandoned me, that I was justified in everything I did. I believed my own lies because it was easier than facing the truth. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that I wasn't good enough. Afraid that you would see through me. So I tore you down to make myself feel bigger. I convinced you that you were worthless because I couldn't face my own worthlessness. That's not an excuse. There is no excuse. I'm just trying to explain something I barely understand myself. I heard about the foundation, what you're doing for other survivors. It's more than I could ever do to make up for the harm I caused. But I'm glad someone is helping them. I'm glad you're helping them. I don't expect a response. I don't deserve one. I just wanted you to know that I finally see what I did. And I'm sorry. Darius Elena read the letter twice. Then she set it down on the counter and looked at Julian. What does it say? He asked. He apologized. The words felt strange in her mouth. He said he finally understands what he did. He said he's sorry. Julian's expression was unreadable. Do you believe him? Elena considered the question carefully. A year ago, she would have dismissed the letter as another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative. But she had changed since then. She had grown. I don't know if he's genuinely changed, she said finally. I don't know if people like Darius can change. But I know this: his apology doesn't matter as much as I thought it would. What do you mean? For years I wanted him to admit what he did. I thought if he just said the words, if he just acknowledged the harm he caused, I would finally feel whole. Elena shook her head. But I already feel whole. I got there without his help. His apology doesn't change anything about my life. It's just words on a page. So what are you going to do with it? Elena picked up the letter and walked to the fireplace. She looked at it one last time, the handwriting she had once loved, the words she had waited years to hear. Then she let it fall into the flames. I'm going to let it go, she said. All of it. The anger, the resentment, the need for validation from him. It's done. It's been done for a long time. I just didn't realize it until now. She watched the paper curl and blacken, the words disappearing into ash. Julian came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. They stood together, watching the last traces of Darius's letter vanish into smoke. How do you feel? He asked. Elena turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had shown her what real love looked like. Free, she said. Finally, completely free. 2 years after the reunion, Elena's first solo art exhibition opened at a gallery in Buckhead. The show was called Emergence, and it featured 30 paintings created over the previous 18 months, abstract works that traced her journey from darkness into light. Tamara was there, champagne in hand, telling everyone who would listen that she had known Elena was talented all along. Sarah Mitchell came with her new partner, looking healthier and happier than Elena had ever seen her. Melissa Turner, now a victim's advocate, brought a group of young women from the shelter where she volunteered. And Julian stood in the corner, watching his wife shine his face, glowing with quiet pride. The reviews the next day were overwhelmingly positive. Critics praised the emotional depth of Elena's work, the raw honesty, the sense of hard-won triumph. But the review that mattered most to Elena wasn't in any newspaper. It was the message from a woman she had never met, sent through the Foundation's website. Dear Mrs. Ashford, I saw your art exhibition today. I cried through the whole thing. Every painting felt like it was telling my story, the darkness, the struggle, the hope. I've been in an abusive relationship for 6 years. I've been too afraid to leave, too convinced that I can't survive on my own. But looking at your work, hearing your story, I finally believe that maybe I can. I'm leaving tomorrow. I don't know what comes next. But I know now that it's possible to start over. You showed me that. Thank you for everything. Elena read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was why she had spoken up. This was why she had told her story. Not for revenge, not for validation. For this, for the women still trapped, still believing the lies, still waiting for permission to save themselves. She had been that woman once, lost, broken, convinced that her abuser's voice was the only truth. Now she was something else entirely. A survivor, an artist, an advocate. A woman who had finally learned that the most powerful voice she would ever have was her own. Elena walked to the window of her studio and looked out at the city where she had been broken and remade. The past was behind her now, not forgotten, but no longer a weight she carried. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities she had once been too afraid to imagine. She picked up her brush and turned back to the canvas. There was still so much more to create.